Hi guys, welcome back to Honest Straightforward Reviews. Today I'm really excited to bring to you a comparison not only for the reference RTX 3080 versus the reference RX 6800 XT, but to my opinion the best AIB versions of these cards, which is the SFX Speedster MERC319 RX 6800 XT versus the EVGA GeForce RTX 3080 FTW3 Ultra. Now please do stay till the end. I have got a lot of graphs to go to, a lot of information to go through. I have been doing these tests for over a week and a half, and these cards have cost me over $4,000 to get my hands on. I have also done over 120 tests to bring to you guys. Now I've got this whole video in 3 segments. The first segment I'll be introducing both the cards. The next segment I'll be going through the graphs with you guys and I'll be presenting you all the tests I've done, and the last segment I'll be looking at my verdict with both the cards, also the reference cards included, and also my top awesome features that I like about them and top annoying features that I hate about them. Without further ado, let's introduce both the cards first. The SFX has an all-new Speedster MERC319, a card that was created with a custom PCB, superior components, and a custom 3-fan cooler, ramped up frequencies, as well as an increased power limiter. Google search keeps changing MERC to Mercedes, but it's short for Mercury. Back in November 2020, an AMD announced 3 graphic cards based on Big Navi holding the same GPU, just a different bin. These GPUs are fabricated on a 7nm derived from TSMC's chip plant, and hence the shortages, which is rumored to get worse as TSMC is based in Taiwan and they are experiencing a drought. Without getting into that too much, these cards will be PCIe 4 interface compatible. The number of hardware accelerated RT cores is set up in a 1-to-1 creation towards the CU count. The reference RX 6800 XT was at start to cost around $649 and about 1,049 Aussie dollars. It has now gone up to $700 MSRP. I'm talking about, not real world prices. I do appreciate real world prices are crazy and through the roof. In Australia it's gone up to 1,200 Australian dollars. The reference RX 6800 XT, which I have included in these tests today, receives 72 active CUs multiplied by 64 shader units in 4608 shading process. This card gets 16 gigs of GDDR6 memory based on a 256-bit memory bus, which is the older version of the GDDR6X memory that Nvidia uses for its RTX 3000 series. The TDP listed is at 300 watts for this product. SFX released its mouthful Speedster MERC319 RX 6800 XT Black Edition, which is a triple fan cooler and a 2.7 slot design with a 2 8-pin PCIe power connector. The design stays close to SFX's thick 3 cards, and this new design will be bringing a name change to the thick brand. The modified RX 6800 XT graphics card has an assertive black and white design with a black backplate with a few cutouts. In the I/O area, the card includes 2 display ports, 1 HDMI 2.1 port, as well as a USB-C Type-C connector. Let's move on to the EVGA card. The EVGA GeForce RTX 3080 FTW3 Ultra is the company's high-end air-cooled AIB card based on the Founders Edition of Nvidia's GeForce RTX 3080 Ampere architecture GPU. The FTW3 Ultra is made for customers who are looking for all the overclocking features and the RGB lighting that goes with it. The RTX 3080 comes with 10 gigabytes, which is aimed at gamers who want to game at about 4K Ultra with ray tracing. The new Ampere graphic architecture by Nvidia is its 2nd generation of real-time ray tracing technology with the introductions of DLSS 2.0. It combines the new Ampere CUDA core cores that can process concurrent FP32 plus INT32 operations, second generation RT cores that feature dedicated hardware with temporal components to accelerate ray tracing motion blur, besides a doubling of ray tracing performance over Turing RT cores, and the new third generation tensor cores that leverage the sparsity phenomenon in deep learning neural nets to accelerate AI interface performance by an order of magnitude over the previous generation. Nvidia heavily leverages AI in its consumer graphics cards, included an AI-based sensor for RTX and for DLSS performance enhancing features. Nvidia has also more than doubled the SIMD horsepower for the RTX 3080 over its predecessor, the RTX 2080, with a staggering 8,704 CUDA cores, 68 RT cores, 272 tensor cores, 272 TMUs, and 96 ROPs. RTX 3000 series are built on a new 8nm silicon fabrication process that is designed by Samsung specifically for Nvidia. The card also takes advantage of the PCI Express 4.0x16. The GeForce RTX 3080 FTW Ultra that has been introduced by EVGA has been equipped with the new ICX3 cooling solution, which is a triple slot cooler leveraging a large aluminium fin ray heatsink with high fin surface area, sporting a 3 hydro dynamic bearing fans in such a way that the middle fan is pushing air slightly off the alignment of the two other fans. To increase the airflow, EVGA has cutouts in the PCB at various places, which is similar to the dual axle flow-through cooling solution on the Founders Edition card. The EVGA card requires a 3 8-pin PCIe Express power connectors, which pulls a whopping 320 watts. EVGA has increased the card to 1800 MHz boost out of the box compared to the 1710 MHz reference. Now guys, let's look through the graphs. Let's look at the first graph, which I have for the speeds for both the AIB cards and both the reference cards. Now let's look at the AMD and SFX together, and let's look at the Founders Edition and EVGA together, because they have different technology in them and you can't really compare the megahertz to megahertz as an apples to apples comparison. Now looking at the SFX, it's increased the base clock by 100 megahertz and another 95 megahertz on the gaming clock, and the boost clock is a whopping 110 megahertz faster. Looking at the EVGA card, it's increased the base clock not at all, neither the game clock. However, the boost clock has been increased by about 90 megahertz. The next slide I have for you guys is looking at 5 key information. So the temperature when the cards are idling and the fan noise, and then you go into gaming temperature, gaming noise, and also what the speed of the fan is at. Now the first two on your left is when the card is not being used, and on the right is when it's being gamed. I have also included both the switch. So SFX introduced a normal mode and a rage mode in the BIOS switch, whereas EVGA has normal and overclock BIOS. Let's look at the reference AMD card. It idles at 48 degrees, which is the highest out of all cards, where the fan is completely stopped. The EVGA, when overclocked, is the coolest running card at 26 degrees, but you have to take that with the caveat that it has the fan running at only 28 decibels, which is not much, guys. You can't really hear it, but it has the fans running. Now comparing the reference AMD card to the Founders Edition GeForce card, you'll see that the reference AMD card runs a lot hotter at 48 degrees compared to 33 degrees to the Founders Edition. Taking that into consideration and taking both the AIB cards, SFX has done an impressive job at where the fan fan is completely stopped and is at 41 degrees, whereas EVGA's card runs at 47 degrees when the fan is stopped. Let's move on to gaming. Looking at the gaming results, the reference AMD card runs at 76 degrees, which is the norm, with a 32 decibels. All of these cards I found were very quiet. Having said that, the GeForce Founders Edition card runs at 77 with a 37 decibel noise level with nearly 2000 RPMs, which is the highest out of all cards. Closely behind that is the overclocked EVGA 3080 at 35 decibels and again nearly 2000 RPMs, but at a very low 67 degrees. When you compare that to the Rage mode of SFX, Rage mode runs hotter, however not really louder. I found Rage mode to just make the card run faster and you can overclock it a bit more. With the Rage mode off, the card will crash if you push it too hard when you're trying to overclock it. However, when you have the Rage mode on, you can push the card a little bit more. Now, let's look at some benchmarks that I've run at ultra settings using DirectX 11. The first benchmark I have for you guys is 3D Mark benchmark, and I've got Firestrike in blue while I've got Time Spy in green. Looking at the AMD lineup, they do really well in Firestrike. As you can see, the AMD cards have, even the reference AMD card has the AIB EVGA card beaten by a score of over 400. When you look at the AIB SFX card, that has it beat by over 1000 points. Moving on to Time Spy, this is where you would expect GeForce cards to do better. However, to my surprise, the SFX just managed to beat out by about 250 points the EVGA AIB card. The next benchmark I have for you guys is a new benchmark by Unigine, and it's called Superposition, and I've set it at extreme settings at 4K. And as you guys might see throughout my tests, and you might have seen with other tests with other YouTubers and over the internet, that the AMD cards aren't really made for 4K gaming. 4K gaming is where you'll see the RTX card performing better. So we have 4K extreme gaming here with DirectX 11, and when we look at the frames per second, you've got the EVGA card miles ahead at 94 frames per second. Even the Founders Edition has the SFX card beaten by about 2 frames, which is not much, but it is pretty awesome to see that. The reference RX 6800 is well behind at 81 frames. Guys, you'll be really excited to know that this time around I've included Cyberpunk 2077. The reason I didn't include the tests before, because Cyberpunk, as you guys are aware, had a lot of issues with bugs and things like that, and it was very much CPU bound. They finally fixed it with a lot of patches, and it is more now GPU bound. Now I've done 2K in green and 4K in blue. Let's look at 4K results. Now, to my surprise, I knew the Nvidia cards will do better, but this is without ray tracing on. They did a really good job at 43 frames per second, whereas the reference AMD card just did 34, which is a big jump, which is 10 at this low end, 10 frames. That's nearly a 20% increase. The AIB SFX card didn't do a lot better at just 37. When we move to 2K, that's where we see the AIB card really catching up. The reference card was still at 50, which is not bad. However, the AIB SFX card was at 56, which was the same as the Founders Edition. It was still beat by the Ultra from EVGA. Another new game that I'll be introducing in this test for you guys is called Watch Dogs Legions. This is a game that is sponsored by Nvidia, so guys, take it with a grain of salt. I think Nvidia would be doing a lot better. Looking at 4K, and yes, that is clearly evident, Nvidia cards are doing a lot better in 4K. However, when we move to 2K, that's when especially the AIB card starts catching up, and it has beaten the Founders Edition by not much, margin of error 1 frame, and it's only 2 frames behind the Ultra. Another game that I brought back for testing is Resident Evil at max settings again at 2K and 4K. At 4K, to my my surprise, the Ultra did a really good job, beating the SFX card by 15 frames per second, which is a whopping margin. Moving on to 2K, where I was expecting the SFX card to catch up and was quite surprised and also disappointed to see that it was still beat by nearly 20 frames per second and a whopping 30 frames over the reference AMD card. I've got another new game for you guys in this test. It's Red Dead Redemption 2 at max settings, 4K and 2K. At 4K, again, the Ultra was on top of all the cards at 71 frames per second, which was 9 frames better than the SFX card. And when we moved to 2K, we didn't see the SFX card catch up. It was still behind by another 7 frames per second. A delightful thing that I'm seeing here is the Founders Edition RTX 3080 costing a lot less than the SFX RX 6800, beating the RX 6800 XT. Next game we're looking at is Metro Exodus. At 4K, the Ultra has the same story again, guys. It's beat all the cards at 103 frames per second at 4K. That is 9 frames better. Again, at this low end, that's really good result. However, when we move to 2K, that's where we saw much of the muchness. Both the reference card and the Founders card were about on par, and the AIB cards were on par. But having said that, margin of error, the Ultra does beat the SFX by 1 frame, which wouldn't be noticeable when you're gaming. The next game I have for you guys is called Borderlands 3. At 4K, the Ultra again had all the cards beaten at 57 frames per second, which is a whopping 11 frames better than the SFX card. When we moved to 2K, the Ultra beat the SFX card by about 8 frames, which is still very impressive. What was not impressive is the SFX scoring nearly the same as the reference RX 6800 XT and also getting beaten by about 6 frames by the Founders Edition card. Next game I have for you guys is Death Stranding. At 4K, this is where I was a tiny bit surprised to finally see the AMD cards catch up. I saw the SFX card finally beat the Ultra at 4K by about 2 frames, and when we moved to 2K, it was beaten by 1 frame. Next game I have for you guys is Assassin's Creed Odyssey. At 4K, again, we're back to the same story. The Ultra is on top at 64 frames, beating the SFX card by a good 5 frames. And when we moved to 2K, we saw a flip of the board. The SFX card actually outdid the Ultra by 4 frames. But what I would like you guys to look at is the Founders Edition card, both in 4K and 2K, is not a lot behind and nearly on par with the Ultra. Now, next game I have for you guys is Civilization 6. In Civilization, again, the Ultra really whooped the SFX RX 6800 XT with a nice 17 frames. Moving on to 2K, this is where we saw the SFX gain and match the Ultra at 218. Interesting to see. If you look at the Founders Edition at 2K, that's at 210. So Ultra has taken a really good card and improved it by about 8 frames per second. But if you look at AMD's reference card at 203 frames, SFX has done a really great job when you consider it like that. The next game I have for you guys is Doom Eternal. Doom Eternal at 4K surprisingly was a game that the AMD cards did better for me. The SFX beat the Ultra by about 9 frames at 4K, and when we moved to 2K, it still had the upper hand over the Ultra by about 11 frames. Even the reference 6800 XT beat the Ultra by about 8 frames. Okay guys, next game I have for you guys is Shadow of the Tomb Raider. At 4K, the Ultra is doing 98 frames per second, which is an improvement of about 14 frames over the SFX card. When we moved to 2K, we did not see an improvement by SFX. It was still behind by about 30 frames, which is amazing to see. The Ultra was doing 178 frames. The next game we'll be looking at is Battlefield 5. Battlefield 5 is where again the AMD cards had the upper hand. The SFX card did 129 frames, which was an 11 frame improvement over the Ultra. When we moved to 2K, that's where we saw the SFX card really pull ahead by about 26 frames. Next game I'm looking at is Control without ray tracing. At 4K is beaten out by Ultra by about 8 frames. When we move to 2K, it's still beating it by a good 13 frame margin. What I found amazing was the Founders Edition beats the SFX card by about 7 frames, which is very impressive to see. The next game I have for you is Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. At 4K, the Ultra was on top with 82 frames per second, which was a whopping 10 frames better than the SFX card. When we moved to 2K, the Ultra still beat the SFX card by a whopping 12 frames. As usual, the last game we're looking at today is The Witcher 3. At 4K, the Ultra pumps out 115 frames per second, which is an improvement of 8 frames over the SFX. When we move to 2K, again, this is where the SFX card really surprises with 186 frames over the 183, which is not a big margin, only 3 frames, but that is bigger because if you look at the Founders Edition and the reference AMD card, it's getting beaten. The AMD card should not be beating the Founders Edition, but whatever SFX is doing with its card, it's improved it to the point that it's actually beating an AIB Ultra as well. Now, let's move on to the averages of all games. Looking at 4K, the AMD reference card stays at 83.25 frames, and the SFX RX 6800 XT has an improvement of 88 frames, which is very respectable. To my surprise, an average 4K result, the RTX Founders Edition 3080 beat the AIB SFX card by a good 1.58 frames. Looking at the EVGA Ultra card, that's on top of the game by 94.5 frames, which is over 11 frames improvement over the AMD reference card. Let's look at 2K, which is where we normally see the AMD cards do a lot better. Let's look at the Ultra. The Ultra is on top with nearly 150 frame average, which is a solid nearly 4 frame improvement over the SFX, which is at 145.8. Guys, let's look at these graphic cards MSRP in Australia. Right now, the AMD 6800 XT is at about $1,049 still. Although I don't think that's going to last. As I said, it's increased due to tariffs in America. It will increase here very soon too. So I think last time I saw it was on pre-order from Harvey Norman in Narre Warren, and that was still being sold at $1,049 for a pre-order reference card. When we move on to the Ultra, it has outpriced itself by about $500, which is a massive overpricing. The RTX 3080 Founders Edition should be about the same price as the American, but MSRP is here at $1149, which is a $100 increase, whereas the Ultra is at only $1439, which is lower than the SFX card. Moving on to real world pricing, we'll see the AMD reference card at $1479, which is really high. We see the SFX card at $1,800, and this is crazy, guys. We see the Ultra by EVGA at nearly $2,000. Let's look at value that you get for gaming, the best bang for your buck. Let's look at MSRP. Without a doubt, if you're getting MSRP at the price without the tariff increases in Australia, $7.55 is very good for AMD. But take that with the price that I have told you about Harvey Norman. That can go up any day to $1,200. If that goes to $1,200, this card will cost you more than the 3080 Founders Edition at MSRP. Out of all the cards, the SFX really is the most expensive at $10.62, which is nearly $1 per frame more than the EVGA Ultra. Looking at real world pricing, this is where we see the interesting fact that the RTX 3080 Founders Edition is the cheapest out of them all, with the Ultra being the most expensive, which is quite disappointing, and the SFX and reference AMD cards being not too far behind. Alright, last but not least, let's look at the best bang for your buck 4K gaming, and let's look at the MSRP cost. Now, looking at MSRP, we're looking at, again, I'm going to point out that the reference AMD card is the cheapest. However, if you go to $1,200, it's going to cost more than the reference Founders Edition 3080. The SFX card is the most expensive out of them still at MSRP. When we look to real real world pricing, it levels out and there's not much of a difference between both the AIB cards if you're gaming at 2K. Right now guys, if you see any of these cards and you've got the cash, I would suggest to get whichever one you can. Verdict time. The Speedster MERC319 Black Edition is a long and very hard to pronounce name that makes me miss the thick 3 branding from which it shares its design and inspiration from. The noise and temperatures will be well under control with the big 3-fan mammoth cooler. This AIB card is clocked faster than the reference AMD card, but it's not too relative, as these days you'll be lucky to get a performance increase of 5 to 10% when you're overclocking. The MERC319 is a strong product with a good amount of graphics memory compared to what Nvidia is offering with the RTX 3080. Keeping that in mind, the AMD cards have a 16GB VRAM capacity, making it quite easy to play 4K gaming into the future as well, and the inclusion of Smart Access Memory or SAM as well could help you out in the future. Right now SAM is very gimmicky. I have done tests behind the scenes and I thought it was absolutely poor to include that in, so hence I have not included any results from SAM. Overall, the RTX 3000 series cards perform better than I expected in the lower resolutions and offer exceptional performance, especially when playing older games. The EVGA AIB card has the highest power limit of up to 450 watts with an option to increase it even further in BIOS, which is not something you can do with the AMD cards, as AMD has crippled a beautiful lineup of cards with a limit to the maximum power they can consume. Even for the AIBs, they have limited them. Furthermore, the RTX 3080 cards offer better drivers, more mature drivers, better ray tracing, support for DLSS, and other features such as GeForce Reflex, Broadcast, G-Sync 360, RTX Voice, RTX IO. If these don't interest you, then the RX 6800 XT with its 16GB graphics memory is an easy choice over the RTX 3080. Let's go through the top awesome and the most annoying features of both the AIB cards, starting off with XFX. Here are the 5 awesome things. 1. It is massively overclocked straight out of the box. 2nd, provides a great improvement over the reference AMD card. It has a USB-C output. 4th, it has 7nm process, making it very good. And lastly, it runs very quiet if you want it to. Now, let's go into the annoying features of the XFX. Firstly, even at MSRP, the XFX card costs a lot more when compared to the AMD or the RTX lineup. 2nd, minimal improvement when you use the switch for the 2 BIOS modes. 3rd, memory overclocking is artificially limited with all AMD cards. 4th, no ray tracing or DLSS to date. 5th, this last point might be relevant to you or might not be, isn't relevant to me because I don't like RGBs. This card has no RGB lighting, okay, so you might not like that. I know a lot of people like RGBs, I don't like them. Let's look at the 5 awesome features of the EVGA card. First of all, RGB lighting makes it light up like a Christmas tree. 2nd, highest power limit of all the RTX 3080 cards out there at this time. 3rd, 8nm process. 4th, power consumption isn't really increased when compared to the Founders Edition RTX 3080. Lastly, it's very impressive how quiet this card is given all the features I just explained. The 5 annoying features about the EVGA card is the increase in price over the Founders Edition. Overclocking the memory is a bit complicated due to the power limit. 3rd, memory isn't overclocked. 4th, runs into the power limit most of the time. And lastly, for me, I don't like RGBs, so this feature is something that I don't like. Alright guys, I hope this video helped you guys out in making up your mind as to which card you should buy and which card you should be looking at. So if you like all those features that the RTX 3080 offers you, then yes, this card, as seen, especially with the EVGA, really does a good job. But even if you can get your hands on the Founders Edition right now, it's a card that will play games a lot better. However, moving off to a year or two, I think the 16 gigs that the AMD card and the SFX card come with will come useful. If you're a person that would probably look at upgrading their GPU in a couple of years time when they have new GPUs out there, then I would definitely ask you to consider the RTX 3080. However, if you're a person who holds on to their graphic card for a lot longer and for 5 years and things like that, I would recommend that you get the SFX RX 6800 XT. Another point to note, which I didn't include in my tests, but I have tested a lot of productivity apps such as DaVinci Resolve on these cards. The RTX 3070 has a better score at productivity than the RX 6900 XT. That is mind-blowing. The lowest tier card, RTX 3070, when you compare that to the highest and the best that AMD can offer, gets beaten at productivity. That tells you something, guys. So keep that in mind as well. Alright guys, that's it from me. If you liked the video, please do subscribe, give it thumbs up. It really helps the channel and also helps spread the word. If you would like to support me, you can also support me by following me on Instagram, Twitter and TikTok, and please do check out my Patreon account as well. Thanks for watching to the end, guys. I really appreciate it. You guys take care and have a great day.